when you're in pain, soothing as a springtime rain, to have a friend right in your corner, your heart will feel a little warmer. Tender loving care, tender loving care, each warm and friendly touch lets someone know you care so much. Tender loving care, tender loving care.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Greenbrier Almond, and thank you for joining us on another program of Tender Loving Care. Each week on Channel 3, I'm happy to talk about an interface between Christianity and medicine. And tonight, I'm going to be talking about the 5th volume of our Stories of a West Virginia Doctor. And these are lessons for the grandchildren, and so they have a moral or valuable lesson involved in each story. And of course, they're about doctoring in the hills, so it does combine Christianity and medicine as we see it. It's a good interface to explore. And I'd like to thank the Record Delta of Buchanan for the headline story on Monday. This would have been the 6th of July, 2015. The book is hot off the press, The Stories of a West Virginia Doctor for Kith and Kin. And I'm going to be recalling some of the stories today that are in the book, 8 different sections that we have of various types of stories. But I want to just lift up some of the comments of the senior staff writer, Amanda Hayes, and thank her personally for coming to the Artistry on Main last week and interviewing me and then doing this article. And I appreciate it. I told her, I said, I don't know if there's a lot of news to this because it's the 5th volume that we put together, but it did begin with a flourish this time as the book came into print, and then we were guests at Tamarack, one of 50 authors in West Virginia, being asked to go to Tamarack, and we were there just at the end of June. So that was a good beginning, maybe a little news in that. Amanda Hayes writes that these stories weave together Appalachian roots for the Almond and, of course, the Gannon family, my wife, and her roots go back to the Philippines. This book has 28 stories that relate directly to our forming our union as husband and wife over the past 40 years and things I've discovered about the Philippines. And I liken it, when I talk to Amanda Hayes about this, I liken it to the similarities that I see between the mountaineer, the West Virginia mountaineer, who have been our patients as we've been doctors here in the hills, and the ordinary people who are farmers and fishermen on Tablas Island, my wife's island in the South Pacific. Also, I draw a similarity between Tablas Island, which is about 10 miles across and about 30 miles long, and Upshur County, which is about the same if you come from the western entrance and then go out to Mount Nebo and then out of the county. It's about 10 miles across, and then it's about 30 miles long. So it's a similar size to Upshur County, Tablas Island is, but the next island is about as far away as Charleston or Kanawha County, and it's separated by a great expanse of Pacific Ocean. So it's more isolated, really, than we are here in Upshur County. The Stories of a West Virginia Doctor for Kith and Kin is the title that we chose, and as Amanda Hayes notes, it's the 5th book in the series. This began with my father's stories, and he had a vision, which has not been realized yet, but visions take a while to evolve. But he said that doctors have a story to tell every day as we take care of the sick and infirm and as we practice medicine. And he wanted doctors to write that story. And he himself wrote 55 of his stories, but he didn't, of course, write a story every day, but he saw that as a possibility. But then he wanted the best stories of the West Virginia doctors to come together into a book, and then that book would be compared, for example, to the best stories of doctors of Ohio or best stories of doctors in Virginia or Pennsylvania or Kentucky, Maryland, and all those stories would be published, the best of those, the best of the best, for the best stories, doctor stories in the United States of America. And he believed this would be a real service to our patients, of course, to the profession of medicine. And that was part of the reason Dad was writing his book. And his did very well. As I recall here to Amanda, the McLean Printing Company of Parsons, West Virginia, has said that it's one of the best-selling books they've ever published. That is my father's book. And so we, our story as begins on the first page of the Record Delta, and it goes on into the fifth page, and then there's a multiple column spread here. And I'd like to continue to talk about this and thank Amanda again for the opportunity to highlight our book. There's a lot of stories about Araceli. This is backed by popular demand because we did this in the fourth book and people really liked her stories. And by the way, she has now, through Gary Maloney, who was our guest last week on our program Tender Loving Care, and will be the guest MC for the next 6 weeks as I leave and go to the Philippines with my wife and family. He'll be running a show here at TLC, and you'll see him as a guest host. But anyway, Gary interviewed Araceli, and they have about 11 or 12 hours of tape telling her life story, and that's being transcribed, and eventually will become a book about growing up in the Philippines, becoming a lady doctor in the Philippines, which is unusual because women don't get the preference of education of men, and then of course coming to America, which is something that 25% of us in America are immigrants, and the rest of us probably have second or third generation immigration to America. And so a unique life story, and she'll be telling that in a future book. I also told Amanda that my sisters and I, 4 sisters and myself, are writing a story about Dad and Mother and how they raised us, and 8 different common events, like going to downtown Buchanan, something that many of us recall, the good old days, when all the farmers gathered on Saturday in front of the 5 and 10, and of course they had matinee movies for us children at the Colonial Theater and Canoa Theater, and the Dairy Queen was still there, all the things that we would do on Main Street as children growing up. So we have that from 5 perspectives, and then 8 different topics, and so my sisters and I have a book coming out also, and I highlight that a little bit for Amanda and for the readers of the Record Delta. I wanted to lift up a few stories, and in a minute or two I'm going to go into some storytelling, but one of them that we lifted up was about they will have to carry me out. And I lifted that up for Amanda and for the newspaper article because it intersects my father's practice, our practices with the VA, and my practice of medicine, and so a lot of overlap. But it's a story of a man, a veteran, and he was a soldier, a Marine, fighting in the Pacific, and my father was in the Pacific also. And then Dad was part of the General Douglas MacArthur's Medical Corps into the occupation of Japan, and he happened to take care of this soldier who developed malaria. And the soldier remembered that, and Dad gave him quinine, which is a very bitter medicine, and people who take a bitter medicine don't forget that. But anyway, they both realized they were West Virginians as they were talking to each other in Japan, and then they both came back to West Virginia. And then Dad became the family doctor to this man's family and to the veteran himself. And lo and behold, then he volunteered to go to Korea to fight. And he fought there, and then he came back, and then lo and behold, he went to Vietnam to fight. And finally he came home, and he decided not to be a soldier anymore. And he didn't want to marry. He wanted a quiet life. He had a family farm. But there was a young lady that convinced him that he should marry her, and they did. But as the story goes, this lady said, "I'll never leave you, and they'll have to carry me out feet first. That's the only way I'll ever leave you. And so on this particular night, as my life intersects with what had been my father's patient and as a family doctor, Richard comes to my clinic that I'm running in Parsons, West Virginia, at a VA clinic, and it's a snowy night, and it's the end of the day, and the nurse comes to me and says, you know, there's one more patient. He just came in, and he particularly wants to see you. And I said, well, fine, you know, we can stay over, there's no problem. And I met the man, and he told me his story, and then he told me that his wife had died that day. And he needed to tell that to someone because they had had a good relationship for a number of years, but there she had died. They carried her out feet first, as the expression goes. And so we talked about that, and then I decided, well, the only way I can comfort him, or the best way, would be to give him a big bear hug, and I do that. And he appreciates it, and then we agree to work on grief and loss and future sessions. But we have intersecting stories, and I thought that was fascinating. And our book is filled with stories like that, where it's very rich in the mountains, relationships one with another, and they go across one generation to another. There are other things here I lifted up, and I'll highlight some stories to you also in a minute, but in the newspaper article, the story of the Richies. It was there were single people actually, Eileen and Jack. They they decided to be Christian missionaries to the Philippines. This was after World War II. They were not married, but they were called of God, and they went to the Philippines, and they met each other, and they fell in love, and they married, and they had 5 children in the Philippines. They raised their children from about 1948 to about 1975. Finally, they came back to Ohio. And last year, Ashley and I and her sisters went over to Ohio and met Eileen. She's now like 88 or so, but very spry. And anyway, I was asking her, I said, well, wasn't that a hard thing to decide to do, to leave your home in America, to go overseas for a life as a missionary? Because we just don't have Christians going like that now that I know of. But she said, no, not really. She says, of course, it was primitive in the Philippines, but he said, when I grew up, we didn't have indoor plumbing, we didn't have running water, we didn't have electricity. I was prepared for the Philippines. There was no problem at all for me to go there and be in that more primitive culture. So we laughed about that, and we have the Eileen Richie story. Another one in particular I lifted up for the newspaper, and it's a scary moment. We always remember those scary moments, but this is called Red in the Morning. There's a saying, red in the morning, sailors take warning. Red at night, sailors delight. My mother used to always recite that. Well, in this particular tale, I'm with my wife and with her brother, who's running for political office. And the Philippine Islands are spread out, as I've indicated. So it's hard to get from one island to another, but they're very tiny islands, not too far away from my wife's island. But we had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go, and we would travel at night, so we would not be in the hot sun, and maybe we would hope to arrive there by evening of the next day. And what you do in the Philippines, if you're going to go from one island to another, you look up into the sky, you see these cumulus clouds like we're having here in July, where we have a lot of rain, and these rain clouds are above the island, and so you can see this big towering 30,000, 40,000 feet high cloud, and that's your target. You aim at that cloud, and if you do, you'll find the island underneath of it, and that's how you mark your distance and how you're going to. That's your compass. That's how you're going to find the next island. So here we are. We're beginning to travel from my wife's island to these other islands which are far away, and the clouds are red, and it's early in the morning, and so the captain is a little concerned. There may be a storm. He knows that sign, and so we, as we get out to sea, it becomes very, very choppy, and our boat starts to rock back and forth, and it has bamboo on each side to support it. but we're jumping up and down and back and forth, and the bamboo snaps on both sides. So now we're in danger of our boat flipping over. And of course, I'm wondering, where's the Coast Guard? But there is no Coast Guard. We're out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The sailors, at the peril to their life, get new bamboo poles which are lashed to the body of the ship, and they edge their way out on little tiny poles to the very end, and they tie these bamboo poles, new poles, in place. And they do a good job, and these hold, and they do keep us from flipping over. But then the boat starts to rock up and down, and we go way up high and then way down, and we hit with a big bang, like a belly flopper jumping into a pool. And anyway, when we hit up in the pallet house area where I'm watching all this happen, the glass shatters in front of the captain, and it was not safety glass like we have on our windshields here, or you might have in a boat in America, but it was just regular window glass. Anyway, these are missiles now coming back toward us. They miss me, fortunately, but they hit the captain. He's bleeding profusely, and he has to tie his leg off with a tourniquet. So I know we're in danger, in several different ways. But thank God we make our way. The dolphins help us. Interesting enough, they join us and they sort of guide us, and we make it to the next island. Well, we're staying overnight with this family and meeting the man, and he's in politics himself, and he has to go back to my wife's island the next day. Well, we don't know the rest of the story, but we find out later that as they leave in the morning to go, then their boat indeed is caught up in a storm, and then it turns over, and perhaps 25 people or more die. So peril at the sea is very evident in our life, going from the Philippines. And it could happen in West Virginia. Of course, we have our perils, and we write about those, mine disasters and snowstorms and things that we have. So we write things like that in the book. So I'm very, very happy that it's out, and I'm happy that the Record Delta highlighted that. Stories of a West Virginia Doctor for Kith and Kin. That's our 5th version. But I'd like to spend our time talking a little bit more about the book and maybe entice you to buy it. These are $15 each. There are 5 in the series. My father's would be the place to start, obviously, and then the 4 other ones. So I think they're very interesting reading. But I want to entice you a little bit by maybe telling some of the stories. I mentioned there's 5 in the series. They're all for sale at Artistry on Main. That's right across from the Dairy Queen here in Buchanan. That's the Art Complex store. There's some 30 artists. We have our wares, some glass work, some painting, woodworking, wood turning, variety of arts, and several authors. So I'm happy to be there. And we also have it at the Historical Society of Upshur County, and they have a wonderful exhibit at the Southern Methodist Episcopal Church there across from CVS on Sunday afternoon. You may want to join in that exhibit sometime this summer from 1 to 4. The book is for sale there, and also then, of course, at the gift shop up at St. Joseph's Hospital, and the auxiliary benefits from that. And they do wonderful things for the hospital. They buy warmers for the premature babies, and they do various things with money that they raise from their gift shop. In the introduction here, I talk about growing up and the concept of priming the pump. A book like this is, I consider it a priming of the pump. The old-fashioned pump, the pump handle, and you had to pump up and down in the water. You get a suction and the water would come up. Usually you could bring it up 16 or 20 feet up. It's not for the very deep wells, but a lot of shallow wells. We have good water tables here in Upshur County, and these wells on the back porch were common when I was growing up. Well, the priming of the pump idea is that you have a bucket of water, maybe an old coffee can filled with water. And before you start to pump, in other words, to get a good suction, you pour some water into the top of the pump, and it establishes a suction. And then when you start to pump, the water comes right up. If you don't have that bucket of water, and you don't prime it, then you don't get water, or it's very hard to get the water. And so there's a principle that you have to prepare the next generation, the next person using that pump, with some of the wisdom from the past, or some of the water from the past, and you have to be prepared. So I tell a story about priming the pump and how that works, and some of my experiences growing up with we didn't have city water at the beginning. We had well water, and sometimes we had to pump the water, and there are various ways to do that. So a book like this has stories like that. I'm going to tell a story from 8 different sections, depending on our time. But the first section we call Family Ties. And each book has had a lot about my family, because the doctor's family, of course, is my experience, and I'm writing from a life of a doctor in West Virginia. But one of the things that we did was we played with cardboard boxes. Now, I know kids have sophisticated toys. We didn't have that, and we didn't even buy anything. My parents grew up in the Great Depression, so we never bought anything that I'm aware of unless we paid cash for it. We didn't have a credit card. As far as I know, my parents never had a credit card. Dad would, of course, write a check or pay cash. And that was even for buying a car. But certainly, if we were going to buy a new dishwasher, well, we never had a dishwasher. I should go, and we didn't have a TV until I was in the 6th grade. But we might have a washing machine, and it would come in a cardboard box. And so that cardboard box became something important for us to play with. And I recall as a 7-year-old playing with a big cardboard box, and we would use it we were building a foundation, a basement and a foundation for a new house. We lived in our garage for my first 6 or 7 years of life. And again, my parents were conservative financially, and if they could afford to live in a garage, that's what they did. And then when they saved enough money to build a house, they built a house. But anyway, I remember there was a great pile of dirt as we dug out a basement. And so having a cardboard box to slide down a muddy mountainside, a hillside, was a perfect toy for us. And we played like that. So I tell that story and other stories about family life. And we can come back and even tell some of those also. Of course, friendships go deep in the mountains. So we have a section in the book about olden and golden friendships. And it's a privilege. We're going to have 50 years of reunion from Buckhannon Upshur High School here next year, the class of 1966. And it'll be 2016, of course. And it's hard to believe that there are people that I've known literally, I would say, almost every day of my life. Well, anyway, one of the things we got into was with my friends up on the hill. We found a turtle, a box turtle, and we decided we were going to cook it, make turtle stew. And none of us had even eaten turtle before, but we thought it would be a great idea. And so Danny and Jean and George and Percy and Jeff and I began to gather apple branches in the orchard. And we knew that we had to be careful about fire, so we built our fire in the middle of the road. It's a gravel-based road up on the hill behind the city park, and we thought we needed water. Of course, we're going to boil the turtle, so we went to our neighbor lady, and she had a well. And Miss Stansbury, we asked her if she would let us get water. And when she realized that we were going to make turtle soup, she really got disturbed. I suppose she didn't really want to see the turtle killed. And so she came out and she began to talk to us. And she said, upon my word, an expression that she would often use, upon my word. And she said, let's check this out. And she looked up into the sky, and there was not a cloud in the sky. And so she told us, she said, the turtle's heart is going to beat until thunder claps. So we listened to that because we thought, we're going to eat a turtle, and we're going to eat his heart, we imagined, and that would still be beating. And then that turtle's heart would be beating inside of us. And anyway, our imagination went wild, and of course that's what she wanted us to do, and we decided, we'd not do that. And we finally let the turtle go. And I'm sure the turtle was grateful for Mrs. Stansberry and for the blue sky. So we had a lot of fun, lifelong friends, even now that I know. I think I have time for yet another story. I want to tell a story about the Amelia Earhart of Upshur County. Amelia Earhart was the first woman to actually fly solo across the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. She also was a doctor. She was a doctor, graduated from Columbia University in medical school. And we learned all these things from Butch Nesbitt's mother. Butch was a classmate of mine, a friend of mine growing up, and we were just little boys playing. But Mary Nesbitt, his mother, was a pilot, and she taught flying lessons at the airport at Lewis Field out at Brushy Fork. Dr. Bob Chamberlain took flying lessons, became a pilot. My father was interested in that, and he had some benefits from his GI Bill, and he considered it. But anyway, what ended his interest was the fact that Mary Nesbitt and several people she was flying crashed into a mountain up near Selbyville, and they crashed and they died. And it was a very tragic, very shocking event in our lives. And I remember that was probably the first realization I ever knew about death. And I heard my parents talking about what had happened, and we sat around the kitchen table as we did. And my father decided never to, or he gave up his dream of flying. I suppose he didn't want to leave all of us alone with Mother to raise us, and of course it seemed like suddenly a very risky thing to do. And of course Butch and I have remained friends, and he's part of my class, but we never did talk about flying or getting in. We never went back to the airport really to get in the airplanes and sit there and play like we were pilot and co-pilot again. So a sad time in our life. Well, there's many, many stories like this. In fact, 68 stories in this Stories of a West Virginia Doctor for Kith and Kin. If you're interested in this type of thing, I hope you'll look it up at Artistry on Main, or the Upshur County Historical Society, or the St. Joseph's Hospital gift shop, or AmazonOnline.com and BarnesNoble.com, Tamarack, and I think really about 50 other bookstores around the state of West Virginia. Until the next time, this is Dr. Greenbrier Allman thanking you for joining us on our program, Tender Loving Care. Special thanks to Channel 3 for this opportunity to come your way each week. We'll see you next week.
Stories of a West Virginia Doctor, written by Dr. Harold D. Allman. A collection of 55 short stories about his experience as a small-town doctor in central West Virginia. And Tender Loving Care, Stories from a West Virginia Doctor, Volume 2, written by Dr. Greenbrier Allman, using videotapes to write 70 additional stories of his father's very colorful life as a small-town doctor. They can be found for purchase at Amazon.com and most local bookstores. Tune into Channel 3 Buckhannon for Tender Loving Care with Dr. Greenbrier Allman, where he talks about the connection between Christianity and medicine.